Morning conference. Welcome to, I think it's going to be our largest conference ever, and I hope a highly successful one. We've got a range of speakers over the next 2 days. It's going to cover everything from the uplands to the lowlands, from crops to horticulture and so on, the next generation. Just a few reminders. Please make sure that you wear your badges the whole time, and please, perhaps if you want to, you can sort of not perhaps display when you leave the building, because I understand there's some commotion on the street outside. Taxis are available to hotels. Please inquire at the registration desk. For anyone wishing for an escort to the car park, please ask the registration desk. And please report any suspicious activity to security or conference staff. And also, by the way, there's been some car keys found, so please go to the registration desk to find those when you want to drive away. But to crack on with conference, because I think it's going to be an exciting time, please welcome President Mr. Peter Kendall.
Good morning. Thank you, Adam, for the introduction. I think, as well as acknowledging this is probably our biggest ever conference, it's also, and I can't guess why, seems to be the biggest ever turnout we've had of the media. Perhaps they want to talk about horse meat at some point over the next couple of days. But to have the press room is actually bursting at the seams. My first duty before I started the meat of my speech is to say a really big thank you to Yara UK. They are sponsors of our audio-visual for the day. As my youngest son rather cheekily told me, he said, Dad, they'll better see your grey hair right from the back. That's thanks to Yara for their support again, a big sponsor of the audio-visual. Conference. What I'd like to say this morning is perhaps the most critical message I've given since I was elected president. You know, you've heard me do this before. Over the years, I've often banged on about the big global challenge of feeding the world in 2030 and beyond. But I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to talk about the challenge of feeding Britain today in 2013. You've heard me bang on in the past about level playing fields in world markets. Today, I want to talk about creating a fair, transparent and safe supply chain in our home market. In the past, I've talked about partnerships with those in power to get things changed. Today, critically, I want to talk about a pact with the great British consumer to get things changed, and I'll return to that in more detail in a moment. Let me start, though, by welcoming Secretary of State Owen Paterson. I almost feel sorry for you, Secretary of State. You've hardly had a chance to catch breath since you landed in DEFRA last September. I do know from the many meetings that we've had the enormous energy you've thrown into the job. Whatever has cropped up, of course it was the TB decision almost in month one, ash dieback, the floods. You've also been doing sterling work, beating the drum on food and drink in China and elsewhere. And of course now we have the horse meat scandal for you to deal with. But welcome to your NFU conference, first NFU conference as DEFRA Secretary of State. There will be some tension later on because although we don't agree about everything, and I will come to CAP a bit later on, there's actually an enormous amount the Secretary of State and I and the NFU do agree about. I particularly want to pay tribute for your leadership, and I mean real upfront leadership on the bovine TB issue, the first issue I want to touch on this morning. Many of you have seen the few protesters outside this morning. It's clear there's going to be a strong core of opposition to any notion of culling badgers as part of a wider battle to eradicate bovine TB. It was a very difficult decision not to proceed with the pilots last autumn, and it would have been easy, Secretary of State, if you'd let TB slip down your list of priorities, particularly with everything else I've talked about going on. But Secretary of State, you've kept it firmly right up there as a lead priority, putting in an enormous amount of time and work to make sure not just the pilots are up and running this summer and that they're successful, but really critical, they lead to a full rollout next year. And again, I repeat my thanks to you. The whole industry owes you a big thank you for that, because it really matters. And it matters not just because the loss and the stress for farmers, and I've seen Julia Evans from Herefordshire, she's an organic shorthorn breeder, not just for Julia and others, but over and over again. And despite increasing biosecurity, despite increased government-led movement restrictions, farmers are seeing their animals testing positive and being carted off for slaughter. It matters because also TB does enormous damage to our production base. And I've said that's what I want to focus on this morning. And anyone thinks that TB doesn't really count, just read the stats. They were on the projector before I started. Almost 35,000 cattle were slaughtered because of the disease in the first 11 months of 2012. 4,000 more than the year before. What a scandalous waste for our industry. And just before I move on to the horse meat and the supply chain, let me again thank you, Secretary of State. And I hope this isn't going to be too many thank yous, but I will say it again because I think it's important. Thank you for something you said at the Oxford Farming Conference. And talking about regulation, you said you start from the position of trusting farmers. That brings me to my second issue today, the weather. And you'll be actually quite pleased that I'm not going to blame the government or even DEFRA for the weather. We've been experiencing the worst weather we've had for 100 years. But what I do want to say ties in with your trust point. It's that when it comes to tackling the risk of flooding and farmers applying the principles of self-help, we've often found ourselves up against government bureaucracy and unable to get the consent we need to maintain our watercourses and flood defences. I'm pleased there's been some acknowledgement of the need for change on that from the Environment Agency, and I trust you'll use all your influence wherever possible, Secretary of State, to cut through the red tape and help us help ourselves when it comes to the critical issue of keeping our land productive. Now let me move on to horse meat, the supply chain, and what I believe needs to happen to put things right. And I don't want to go over the whole story, the whole saga of the horse meat scandal. But what I'd like to do is draw three initial lessons from what has emerged so far. First, we've learned it's a nonsense when retailers claim they can sell 8 beef burgers for £1 and claim complete transparency about what's in it and where it comes from. Second, it's clear that the longer a supply chain and the more borders it crosses, the less traceable our food is, and the more the chain is open to negligence at best, I think fraud and criminal activity at worst. The third lesson, the great British consumer prefers to know they are eating great British food. Food produced with passion and pride by British farmers and growers. And that for me boils down to a very clear and simple message. We need shorter supply chains which source from British farmers and growers. And what do I mean by short? And it's really keeping it simple. Farmer, processor, shop. Simple, short supply chains. Farmer, processor, shop. We must make that our collective ambition. But if farmers and growers are to deliver more of what British consumer buys, it's going to take a major shift to the way our food is sourced in the whole supply chain. And something I have said before, it's not just about feeding today's 63 million consumers. Standing still production-wise isn't an option, because why? On a self-sufficiency scale, it just takes us backwards. The latest official projections for the UK population are stark. By 2021, that's just 8 years away, the projections are the population of England alone will have increased by 4.5 million people. As we're sat in Birmingham, that's 4 more Birminghams of people to feed. Right on our doorstep as British farmers. That increased population, we may or may not like that idea, but it's going to happen. And if we want everyone to have the opportunity to buy British, we've got to start getting things right today. This is a massive opportunity for all of us, and I include public procurement as well, Secretary of State, in that. It's often been a disaster area and many broken promises, but it doesn't have to be. Just look at what was achieved last summer with the Olympic Games, and it's great to see Rosie Boycott, who leads London procurement, yesterday championing the whole of London following that example. And that's what I'd like to focus on in the next few minutes. I want to talk to retailers, to consumers, and of course us, ourselves as farmers. But first, Secretary of State, the bit I talked about where we would probably disagree a bit, I do want to come back to talk about Europe. I'm not going to go into great detail because we have a CAP session tomorrow, and this morning we launched our CLA, NFU, TFA campaign for a fair deal for English farmers on the CAP. But Secretary of State, let me be absolutely clear. We, as the NFU, have never argued for a bigger CAP budget. We've always recognised the pressure on the public purse in these difficult times. Our argument has always been that British farmers should not end up disadvantaged compared to their opposite numbers in France, Ireland, Denmark, Holland, or elsewhere in Europe. And the farmers in different parts of the UK should not end up disadvantaged versus each other. Let me be really blunt and to the point. I, the NFU, are worried that is exactly what will happen on both accounts as a result of the government's stance on CAP reform. Let's take what's happening on coupled support. Having opposed coupled payments as a matter of principle at every opportunity, it now seems, from what was said at the NFU Scotland conference 2 weeks ago, the DEFRA is now quite happy for the Scots to strengthen their coupled payments. On modulation, Secretary of State, let me be crystal clear as well. If there's one thing that unites every farmer in every sector in every part of the country, it's a hatred of modulation. DEFRA has negotiated the right to cut English farmers' payments by up to 15%. That's intolerable to us at the NFU and our farming partners who launched our campaign this morning, particularly when we know that other countries, some other countries, are planning to transfer 25% in the other direction. I know when I'm out doing meetings and I explain what's going on, farmers are saying to me, who's batting for us in this CAP negotiation? And I think when you look at the unity, when you look at 3,000 farmers turning up for the SOS Dairy campaign in Westminster last June to fight what they saw as an injustice of a price cut, just wait to see the strength of feeling you'll see amongst farmers if they try to modulate one part of the UK out of all proportion to the rest, and I mean England. That's why we brought the group of farmers together, to show the strength of feeling we have on this issue. And it's not even as if that modulation is going to fund smart, small-scale, targeted environmental schemes across the whole country. I'm increasingly concerned it goes to fund grand schemes in prettier parts of the country, and more often than not, ends up taking great swathes of land out of production. As I just said the figures earlier on, we can't afford to have great swathes of land taken out of production. The farmers of England and Wales have got a job to do. And first and foremost, our job is to feed this country. The same goes for ecological focus areas. Even, and I say even, the EU heads of government have signed up to say and stress that EFAs should be, and I quote, implemented in ways that do not require the land in question to be taken out of production. Please, Secretary of State, on this issue, listen to us. Listen to the farming industry. Because if there's one single message that comes out of the horse meat scandal, it's that our consumers want to know their food is coming from as close to home as possible. We need you to work with that message when you're making decisions on greening, modulation, and environmental schemes. Secretary of State, you spend lots of your time, your weekends in the countryside. You know what farmers do. You know that we do not need big government on this, and that farmers can do more for the environment in their own efforts than any amount a prescriptive, bureaucratic regulation will deliver. So please trust us with it. And now, I'd like to come back to the fallout of the whole horse meat scandal. And I'd like to say something to retailers. After well over a decade of campaigning, we've finally seen the adjudicator appointed to police the grocery supplier code of practice. That is a great result, and I commend all the organisations and politicians right across many different parties who have helped make that happen. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to wish Christine take on all the best in that new role and encourage her to use all her energy and media skills to make a real difference for British farmers and growers. But the adjudicator will deal with one aspect of supply chain relationships. It's not enough to put right the flaws, the gaping flaws we've seen in the chain that have come to light over the last few weeks. I know when I speak for all farmers, when I say I'm absolutely furious about what has happened in those last few weeks. When Marek Raymond's cattle leave his farm, they're 100% British beef. Every last kilo of them tagged, numbered and fully traceable. It's taken British farmers a lot of heartache, a lot of hard work and cost since the days of BSE and foot and mouth to get where we are now, and we're rightly proud of what we have achieved. We now need supermarkets to stop scouring the world for the cheapest products they can find and start sourcing high quality, traceable product from farmers here at home. Of course, we'll have more explanation from Philip Clark after lunch on what he means by what we've heard about in the press this morning. And that may mean more dedicated supply groups. But it certainly will mean longer-term thinking and a shorter supply chain. I hope it will mean fewer marketing campaigns dressing up foreign imports with a homely British-sounding name in the hope that consumers won't notice it's not British. If you want to know what I'm talking about, just take a look at Morrison's Hemsley range. Now, it's slightly unfair for me to pick Morrison's out because I have a lot of time. On the whole, they're doing a great job for British farmers, and I'm a big fan to see what they're doing to buy more and more British. But even taking into account that consumers are wanting value lines, I think the tune this sounds is completely wrong. British poultry producers supplying Morrison's have to meet stringent welfare standards higher than EU counterparts at extra cost. So what happens? They relax their 100% British commitment and introduce the Hemsley range, a familiar sounding name, very like a traditional market town in Yorkshire that conjures up all the positives that go with that. When the reality is that poultry is sourced outside the UK and to less exacting standards is being sold under that label. We need an end to that. It's a disservice to the consumer, and to be honest, it's no way to treat British farmers who invested heavily to meet Morrison's standards. So I'm pleased, I'm again reflecting on the press coverage this morning, delighted that Philip Clark, Chief Executive of Tesco's, is speaking this afternoon. But I would like to just remind conference and farmers in general, before we as farmers collectively think we should kick 7 bells out of the supermarkets and think the answer to this major loss of confidence for everyone to turn our backs on retailers, I would just like to remind the consumers who choose voluntarily to go to shops now spend 58 pence in every pound with supermarkets. They are British farming's biggest and most important customer. Philip, like his counterparts in other major supermarkets, has realised the pulling power of the message that the food they're selling is British. That's brilliant news. Thank God at last they've got the message. We're delighted when you brag about that you source from British farmers, that when Sainsbury's big up Welsh lamb in their recipe cards, when Tesco's put pictures of Norfolk pig farmers on their finest pork range, when Marks and Spencer's decorate their walls with messages from Kent soft food producers. But I think what we've seen over the last few weeks tells us we need to go a step further and make the same approach, the same bragging in your value lines. And of course, we've now seen the processed food ranges as well. We want you to brag about your standards and fairness too in that whole relationship. Take the Dairy Voluntary Code of Practice, a great example of what happens when an industry pulls together, when producers work together to make things change. I'm asking you, Philip, and the other chief executives of supermarkets to ask your processors, those who you're buying from, whether they're implementing the Dairy Code of Practice in full. If they aren't, ask them why not. Let's get some transparency right through the dairy supply chain. On the same theme, let's not forget pork. Let's not forget the MPA's No Stalls pledge. And not just for own brand labels, we now see that people will brag about no stalls in their own brands, but not about other people's brands. That has got to change. Brag as well about lamb and fresh veg and every other product that leaves our farms. Let's work together to help restore confidence in the whole supply chain. Now I'd like to say something to the great British consumer. We all know that you prefer to buy food that comes from as close to home as possible. Joanne Denny-Finch will be going through a poll this afternoon, but we've done one at the NFU, our own one poll survey, shows that nearly 90% of consumers want to buy British. I would start by thanking British consumers. Thank you for buying British, for supporting British agriculture. And we know there are challenges. We know that the price is an issue for many of you, particularly in these difficult times, and the vast majority of you choose to shop at supermarkets. Our message today as farmers cannot be and should not, and emphatically is not an elitist message. This is for everyone, wherever you shop. For our part as British farmers, we're working hard to make sure you can buy traceable British food produced at rigorous high standards at all price points. That's our commitment from the farming industry. We need your help, though, in helping create your help, the consumers. Consumers, please help us in creating that transparent, fair and safe supply chain we all want and need. First, we want you to buy British. Start by looking for the red tractor logo. It stands for traceable, independently inspected food from farm to pack. Secondly, we want you to be demanding. Demand answers from the people you buy from: supermarkets, butchers, restaurants, pubs, farm shops, farmers markets. Ask, where was your food produced? Is it local? How was it produced? What's in it? Because if you're buying British, we've got a great story to tell. Finally, this morning, I want to say a word to us all as farmers. As I mentioned earlier, this is a critical moment for British food and farming. We can either make the most of it, or we can let this great opportunity to bring food production home go to waste. I've spoken up here for 7 years now, and you know my message. I'm really up for making the most of this opportunity. And if we all pull together with a simple message, simple message, we can make it happen just like we did last summer with our SOS Dairy campaign. Because I'm very proud of our Farming Delivers campaign you saw on the screen a moment ago. It brings us close to our customer, and it really nails the good stuff we do as farmers on animal welfare, on cleaner energy, on creating landscapes, and the environmental improvements of which we're all so proud. But I know it's been difficult. We know that 2012 has been a diabolical year for farming. So bad that some farmer picking up on our theme said, farming is delivered for everybody this last year, except me as a farmer, was his rather glum note. I'm not sure I would go quite that far, but there's no hiding. It's been incredibly hard out there for many, many farmers. And on that note, I would like to say a big thank you to Prince Charles's Countryside Fund, the Duke of Westminster, the NFU Mutual, Farm Crisis Network, Rabbi, and the Addington Fund for the support they've done for a lot of farmers who've had a really challenging time over the last year. A big thank you to them. I'll try and be upbeat now. Despite 2012, despite the weather, despite the many farmers having to borrow to buy inputs, despite sheep prices being on the floor and feed prices being through the roof, I still do believe our prospects are good. We desperately need, of course, stable year weather-wise. I've been trying to get things done at home, trying to grab the weather windows. We need a stable year weather-wise. We desperately need a vaccine for Schmallenberg. We need a science evidence-led approach on neonicotinoids, Secretary of State. We really need you and the rest of the UK government to fight our corner in Europe and deliver a fair result at home. We really need retailers to engage with us to get the supply chain shortened and made fair for all. But this is the challenge for farmers. Let's not just look at everything and everyone else. Let's ourselves make the most of this one-off moment to rebuild the food chain in a way that does justice both to ourselves as farmers and to the British consumer. And that means us being demanding too, just in the same way I've been asking consumers to be demanding. It means being rigorous when it comes to our own on-farm traceability. It means being willing to open up our doors and welcome the public to see how their food is being produced on our farms. Maybe taking part, for example, in Open Farm Sunday. It means bragging about what we're doing to meet the Campaign for Farmed Environment targets. It might mean descending on Westminster or taking to Twitter to agitate for fairness on farm gate prices, or lobbying your buying group or milk buyer to sign up to our fair deal for English farmers on CAP. Whatever it takes, I'm confident that by working together as an industry we can do it. So let's make it happen. And this conference is a great place to start. We've got an exciting programme as well as the Secretary of State. Looking at the supply chain, what better place to start than having the boss of Tesco's here? We've got the Director General of the CBI when we're looking at growth and jobs. We've got the head Sonliner of the European Farmers Organisation. This is a great place to start redesigning the food supply chain. We've also got, in our environmental breakout session, the Met Office. I hope they're going to promise me a better year in 2013. Hopefully, and again, we've got, I know, a social media breakout session so we can learn how to get smarter at getting our messages across to the general public through social media. I want everyone to make the most of this conference. There's plenty of opportunities to engage, to learn. For delegates, please make your points. Take the opportunity in breakout sessions or up here to get your message across. I don't believe there's been a better chance to change the way we do business for British agriculture. Let's make the most of it now. Right, we now move to the more open session. It's already mentioned, obviously, in my opening speech, the new Secretary of State, DEFRA, Owen Paterson, who arrived in a whirlwind of activity, I think, last September, as I said already mentioned. Owen has worked incredibly closely with his North Shropshire constituency. He's a MP who has been involved in agriculture for a long time. I know the interest you've taken in TB, the 600, I think, parliamentary questions you asked on that subject, and therefore I can see why you're bringing so much drive to all of this. I can only imagine that for someone who does enjoy the countryside as much as you, to be in charge of DEFRA must be a real job to yearn and crave for, a fantastic opportunity. So great, welcome to Owen Paterson, Secretary of State, to say some words at the conference.
Well, Peter, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to speak to you at the conference of the organisation that for more than a century has been the voice of farming in this country. Farming has long played an important part in my life. My family have been farmers and tanners for generations. And as the MP for North Shropshire since 1997, I've worked closely with my local NFU. I know firsthand the vital contribution that farming makes to our economy, environment and society. So, as you said, it was therefore a real privilege to be asked by the Prime Minister to take on the role of DEFRA Secretary and to build on the excellent work of Caroline Spellman
and Jim Pace. Since my appointment, I've set out 4 clear priorities for the department. Firstly, to grow the rural economy, improve the rural environment, and third and fourth, safeguard both animal and plant health. And you are key to all of these. I must start by recognising what a tough year it's been. 2012 started with drought and the threat of standpipes, but ended up being the wettest year on record. The poor weather affected the sector as a whole, with livestock at increased risk from parasites and crop yields significantly reduced. The average wheat yield, just 6.7 tonnes per hectare, was the lowest since 1998. The wet conditions have also had a knock-on effect on preparations for this year's crops. And further pressures on the industry have included rising input costs, bovine TB and Schmallenberg. Charities such as the Royal Agricultural Benevolent Institution, Farm Crisis Network and the Addington Fund are to be commended for the work they're doing to help those facing genuine need and hardship. We're also talking to the banks to ensure they understand the pressures farmers are operating under. On flooding, we must continue to work together. I am fully aware that rural watercourses need to be kept clear, and there have been problems this winter. The Environment Agency is working with the NFU to look at how to make it easier for their local officers and farmers to take action to maintain watercourses, allowing for proper drainage. We've also made sure that our investment in improving flood defences doesn't just focus on bricks and mortar. Projects completed last year provided an improved level of flood protection to more than 74,000 hectares of agricultural land. Despite these difficulties, I am convinced that British farming has much to be positive about and will continue to rise to the primary challenge of producing more food. We must ensure that the British public have confidence in the industry and, in the light of recent events, the food they are eating. The substitution of beef with horse meat in a number of products has shaken consumer confidence. It is totally unacceptable that anyone should buy something labelled beef and end up with horse meat. That is fraud. And I am determined that this criminal activity should be stopped and that anyone who's defrauded the customer